See you. At this time, I'd like to bring the Monday, June 5th City Council special meeting to order. Start now. Okay, with that, do I hear adoption of the agenda?
So moved.
Any second?
Again?
It's been so moved in second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have Councilmember Lebo will be joining us shortly, or is he there yet? No, on Zoom, and I'm not sure where Councilmember Riddle is. So they'll be here. With that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Steve and Kim first. I said, who wants to do you want to talk about it first? Who wants to lead us off?
Yeah, City Attorney Pratt is going to start us off, and I'll join in where needed.
Okay. Okay, well, okay, we'll make sure our mics are closer to us.
This is as close as it gets. So council, I'll go through and just try and highlight the changes that we made since your last meeting, where we took what you said regarding a chart we had given you, and we tried to put what you indicated into the ordinance, or what we thought you indicated. So we added a purpose and intent section. I think that was Councilmember Furutani's idea. We thought it might help. And so we've added A through H, specifically E. That second sentence comes from Councilmember Riddle's idea about noise abatement. And she sent me the language she had verbalized during that meeting, and I included it here. So the rest of those have come from discussions you've had, research that we've done, but that's where A through H came from. Then in 12.50.020, we just added some headings because this ordinance has gotten longer as we have gone through it. So hopefully that will help people find things more easily. We added an application type in B, the type 3 permit decision, which Steve and I felt we heard council was leaning towards during that last meeting. I've added a comment where I've indicated what type of notice and public comment is available for that standard type 3 permit decision. In C, I wanted to add, at a minimum, you meet the WSDOT and the International Building Code requirements. And in 2, we changed it to shall be quoted, so it's more easy to get their graffiti off. Let's see. Number 4, just clarifying that the Public Works Director is going to take into account long-term maintenance recommendations from the applicants. It says engineers for third-party engineers. That's a typo on my part. It should say applicants, engineers, or third-party engineers, which the Public Works Director would hire. And number 6, this was worded a little bit better after hearing your discussion, so that the applicant would provide documentation of how the retaining wall design satisfies applicable WSDOT traffic, noise, policies, and procedures. And then the alternative that I have on the side comment there, that is Councilmember Riddle's language that she discussed at your last meeting. And so I've got that in there as an alternative for 6, or in the, or you could leave it also in the intent section. And I think the clarification we might want to, you might want to discuss is, I think if you put this in as a requirement, then they have to show you how they've met through reflection, and absorption techniques. And so you need to make sure that that's required. Because I think it will be under this language, you will be requiring that. And I do not know what WashDOT currently requires, so. The aesthetic design in D. Tried to clarify Public Works Director will issue the decision consistent with this section after getting the review of a third-party qualified professional. We could add independent third-party qualified engineer if that would satisfy some concerns. And the same could be under D2.
I just ask if, would the council like her to go through the whole entire list and then ask questions, or would you like to ask some questions as we go along? Whichever you guys would like. Okay. No? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Continue then.
Just keep going.
Right.
Okay.
Thanks, Mayor.
D3, I just combined the monitoring and planting plans for trees and plants because now they're the same number of years. If you go with a type 3 permit decision, then I've added section 2, which needed to be revised in section 1626, so that we include this section that it would apply to chapter 12.50. And the same for, we would need to make an amendment to section 1626.030 to add this retaining wall permit to the list of type 3 decisions. So I'm happy to review any of these, answer any questions. And I know Steve's going to go through the design guideline edits.
Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, council members, I just wanted to let you know that I have some proposed clarifying amendments to this draft. And I don't have any questions on what was done. I just want to say very nice job on the purpose and intent and the type 3 permit clarification. I think that's a positive step, but I will hold my comments till after the presentation by Planning Director Bennett, if that's okay with my colleagues. Thank you.
Okay.
So should we talk about the changes in the design guidelines and then talk about it in general? That seemed like the way the council wants to go. Okay. Our track changes, underlined strike through seem to get washed out in the process, but I'll just walk you through. I think this is very specific areas where we changed the design guidelines since the last time you discussed it. I believe that the shall and the should is new for this draft. And so that's just taking definitions that we have from our town center design guidelines for shall and should, just to clarify what that is. So that's more of a clarifying amendment. And then the main body, the main changes were in section 2 after figure B in the design guidelines. And so instead of just having a 2, you now have a 2A and B. And this is due to the fact that we really need to treat these two situations differently in what was figure C and figure D. Figure D has also changed. So 2A really responds to the situation where the wall is behind a sidewalk, where you're going to have more room to do landscaping. So right now, as a placeholder, it may be sufficient, but I'm just referring to the density of planting that's in the picture at this point. So we can probably get that specified more in more detail, but at least that gives a sense of what under this particular proposal we're looking for. So we're really focused on what is that landscape behind the sidewalk in A. And then it's B2B is focused on the situation where there is no sidewalk. The wall and any planting is right up against the shoulder or the travel lane. And we know just from our dealings with that situation with Sound Transit that there's really just kind of one particular technique where you create these vine pockets for that. And so what you should have seen is the old figure D that had the diagonal lines and the vines going up it there. But so for the time being, what we have is a section of one of these vine pocket type installations. And so that just, you know, kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like. And then the section, subsection B tells you how often those vine pockets would need to occur. And in discussion with a landscape designer at Pace Engineering, as our engineering consultant, it turned out that, you know, if you're not going to have irrigation, then 6 feet apart is probably a good, you know, on center average. And since we, you know, since, you know, so we need to provide a situation that would address that, to, you know, a case where they can't do irrigation. Ideally, in talking with the landscape designer, we would want to see these irrigated with a low pressure system, drip system. And if that was the case, we provide an incentive of 10 feet on center. So if we have a 500-foot length of wall, then it needs to average out to you know, one of these every 10 feet, one of these vine pockets.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Steve. A question, since our preference is that we have an irrigation system, could we at least specify that here? And that where it's possible, we'd like to see an irrigation system, because I am concerned about the survival of the plantings here. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, we can put a should statement in there, but I think that just the two different on-center dimensions basically tell the applicant, you know, our incentive is to do this in an irrigated fashion, and then you only have to put one every 10 feet. And so you know, so the opposite being that, you know, that it's a more, it's a cost trade-off. So
I understand. I was just I was picking up on your thought that we'd prefer that they irrigate it, and there is an incentive if they do,
yeah.
But I don't know how my other colleagues feel. I think it would be good to say, you know, to express the fact that we have that preference in some appropriate way. I don't have any specific word.
Okay, yeah, I think the second sentence in B can be altered to make it clear that this is a preference, just by saying, you know, that when permanent irrigation is installed, and this is the preference of the city.
That would be,
yeah.
I would personally appreciate that.
Okay. And another.
Deputy Mayor, hold on. Deputy Mayor French.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Director Bennett. First of all, thank you, Kim and Steve, for this excellent work. I mean, the turnaround was fantastic in the short period of time. A couple of questions. Before I get too far, I agree with Councilmember Bodie. If we can say there's a preference for the irrigation, I think that's very important. The second thing is, as a layperson, I don't understand the vine pockets. Is this something that WashDOT has in their portfolio of things that they actually utilize? I want to make sure we're not cross-purposing here, because that we have a narrow window to.
Yeah, in all of our conversations, this, you know, it seems to be something that's very much within what they have been talking to WashDOT about. It's not really South Transit, but WashDOT is willing to use this treatment.
Excellent. And just for the edification of everybody, just as a reminder, WashDOT has a lot of authority when it comes to what the design is specifically, and we have some narrow kind of guidelines that we can work within as a municipality. The other question is, just out of curiosity, how does this work? Is it supported on either end, or is it wrapped around and it's just like a tray from a vine pocket?
Well, if you just kind of think about this in the other dimension, it's just a, you know, there's a lower wall that, you know, you can see kind of at the bottom of that, and then this is basically just a hole between the lower wall. It's a vertical hole, and then there's a horizontal hole that allows the vegetation to get moisture from the
Okay.
back, according to this drawing. I don't know if that's absolutely necessary, but you know, that's the example we have at this point. So, you know, it could be that it can get enough irrigation without that
Natural
that
flow.
hole to the back, and you know that. But so there may be structural issues with that. But so
That's my question, because we
Yeah.
talk about, you know, third party structural review. I want to make sure that this is not going to be a place where we're,
yeah,
but
and
it's
we
intriguing. I've
know-
never seen this before.
Right, but we know that, you know, there are perforations in walls for drainage, so
Sure.
you know, you know, I'm sure that something engineers can take into account as they design the wall. But yeah,
Thank you.
I don't want to, you know, specify that they do this until we know more about it,
Fair enough.
but just give an example, a picture example. There was one other thing I wanted to say before, if that'd be okay, just about the other couple, the change specific to this particular 2B is that last sentence in talking with our landscape design expert. You know, he was pointing out that in a lot of cases, especially the more hardy vines, that they're deciduous, they're not evergreen. So we probably want to have them consider the placement of the vine pockets in relationship to the artistic image. Because, you know, if it turns out that they have to use the most hardy species, you probably would be better to look at year round if they're not competing. And there's usually, in all the depictions we've seen, there has been some spaces where there's not a lot going on. And so we can encourage them by just adding something like this to space those vine pockets so that they, you know, they don't overtake the drawings or the artistic relief.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Director Bennett, if I could comment on that, I think it would be good if we just said do not substantially obscure, because it might obscure it a little bit,
Yeah.
in which case we're fine, because we like the greenery, right? And so just some, you know, little wiggle room there so that we don't get in the situation where we don't have any vines or plantings.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
makes sense. So if there's no objection, we'll just
Thank you.
come back with that in the next draft, both those changes. And the only other change that I think is substantive is just clarifying, after talking with the landscape designer, she just said that, you know, there's just really no way that these green walls work. And I'm looking at last page, option 3 or the provision 3. These green walls just are not going to work without irrigation. In fact, he had a breakdown of what those blocks look like, and they have a little slot in them where an irrigation pipe is supposed to go through. And that is the manufacturer's design of the blocks you're looking at. That, you know, they would, you know, you would probably be asking somebody to go against the design of the living wall blocks if they didn't put in irrigation. And so that change was that last sentence. I think it was limited to that last sentence in number 3 on the last page of your packet. So happy to try to address any other questions.
Member Bodie.
Yes, and I apologize because I missed our last few meetings on this, so I'm catching up here. So we have talked a little bit about DOT guidelines and so forth, and this is a retaining wall ordinance that would apply throughout the city. But I want to clarify that it would apply to the upcoming Sound Transit proposal and to whatever WashDOT might interact with us on. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that I have timing wise, we're still good in terms of having this apply to those big upcoming applications.
Right now, this would apply to any application that hasn't vested, and we do not have the Sound Transit application yet. And I'm not sure which other WashDOT projects you might be talking about.
I was just talking about the WashDOT component. Is their role just approval? They're not a co-permittee, co-applicant?
It will be their wall, so they have review.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. That helps. I just wanted to, that is my understanding, but I wanted to confirm it since We have our city attorney here.
Okay,
Yes,
Councilmember
just on point. The other washed up project that might well fall under this is the roundabout on 104.
Right.
Because a retaining wall is likely to be needed there.
And one on point as well. Thank you, Vice Chair Cassover. You beat me to that, as well as the culvert that's going to be at some point at the edge of our city, because there's a retaining wall there that will be necessary.
The shoreline.
The shoreline.
Huh?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pretty big one, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Larry?
Yeah, it's just a more general question, just to make sure we're all on the same page and also to help the public. Would it be accurate to say that this has sort of been like a three-party negotiation where the city is proposing what we want in terms of guidelines and requirements for the wall? Sound Transit is the one who would actually be paying for the wall. But since WashDOT owns the highway, they ultimately get to approve what the wall looks like. Would you say that's relatively accurate?
I'd say that's accurate in that those actual negotiations are going on. But if council passes this ordinance, council will be saying to WashDOT and Sound Transit, you have to abide by this ordinance in the design and in the construction and the approval. So that's why we are being openly aware of the, of the rights Sound Transit has, of the rights WashDOT has, because this ordinance will not be a negotiation unless we say things like should.
Okay. And also just to clarify, so members of city staff have been meeting frequently with Sound Transit and WashDOT to make sure that they're broadly on the same page as us.
Yes, and we will be, I know that Public Works Director, Jeff Perigo, will be discussing that with council on the 8th. At your regular meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Cassover.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you very much, Attorney Pratt and Director Bennett for this. I want to follow up on Councilmember Goldman's comments there and just reflect back on some comments I made at the last meeting too, which is that there are limits to our ability to make demands on Sound Transit and on WashDOT. And I want to be sure that we understand what those limits are and that you have drafted this in such a way that we have not exceeded our authority and would not be subject to any legal pushback from either of those much larger agencies.
I can say the first draft of this that Steve and I did was definitely within your authority. As we have moved towards there, as this has been an iterative process, council has had discussions, you've had a public hearing. I would say we have been giving advice that would keep this within your authority. But I cannot say that it's been drafted right now so that you will not get a challenge from either of those agencies. We are trying to do that, but I cannot at this point, after we, have added and subtracted things, say that that is definitely the case.
But you will let us know if we've skated a little close to the line.
I don't know that if you're skating towards close to the line, yes. And I think I've already tried to do that. If I think you go over the line, I will not openly tell you that in open session. I would want to ask you if you would like an executive session, and I would do that in executive session. And then you guys, council, would have the choice of whether to bring that information and advice into open session, but I would not take that prerogative on my own.
Thank you. That's really helps.
Okay. Any other question? Councilmember Fairtime, you have anything?
Good, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Bodie, you had a few things you'd like to add?
Yes, I have some.
Okay.
John, I think your mic's on.
Welcome, Councilmember Lebo.
Just getting a little. Good evening.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
Yes, I had some, having had an opportunity to review this, and again, admitting that I've been absent from the council deliberations for a few weeks while I was out of town. I have some suggested revisions that I'd like to share with both our city attorney and our planning director, because they have not had a chance to review this, and also with my colleagues. So they're fairly short. Some of them are minor word changes. They're all, to me, in the mode of clarifications. So not a big deviation from our current draft, which I actually think is a very good draft, and I appreciate the work between drafts that has gone on by our team to get it to this state. So there are paper copies in the room. There is a copy up on the screen. It's just one page. So I will walk through it if that's okay, and then answer any questions. So I really, I thought the purpose and intent section was a very good addition. And my only, I only have a few comments. First of all, in A, I thought we undersold the importance of aesthetic and topographic measures as mitigation. And so while this is not, absolute language here that I've proposed that is unmodifiable, it's welcome to folks to edit, but I wanted to say that retaining walls can result in visual and physical blight, tree and vegetation removal, impairment of gateway areas, and other impacts that require visual design, planting, topographic, and aesthetic mitigation. And so again, open to revisions to that, but my intent was to it's more than just optional aesthetics. That isn't really what we've been talking about. It's more to address the combination of visual and other impacts that we've been talking about. Again, not these exact words are not necessary, but the concept is what I was going for. In section E, I'll pause. Feel free to raise your hand if there's any questions as we go along. In section E, I thought mitigation was a better word than evaluation. Basically that, let's see, where am I? And sound reflection evaluation. I think we're talking about mitigation, not just evaluation, but that was my understanding. So again, comment on that if necessary.
My only comment is that was Councilmember Riddle's.
Oh, okay.
Evaluation.
So we'll try
was
to,
her word.
yes, thank you.
But I would approve of mitigation.
I as well.
I think it strengthens it, and that's my goal is not to change the overarching substance of this, but to kind of strengthen our messaging, I guess. And then the same thing in section F, we have is it
Yeah,
F?
I think you meant G.
I meant G. I'm sorry. Yes. I was jumping back and forth when I was writing this, so I apologize. I just did this morning. Encourage building material choices, etc. And I thought ensure was stronger than
Consider.
Yes. So I was leaving encourage in, but strengthening consider. If that makes sense. Thank you for helping me. I should have marked up my copy. Okay, and then in the retaining wall construction and design section, 12.50.020, I was very pleased that we went with the type 3 permit. I think that was the exact right way to go from my personal perspective. But I thought I looked at type 3 permits, and there's a kind of optional neighborhood meeting provision. And so I thought, you know, for a small retaining wall, maybe you don't have to have a neighborhood meeting. But I thought, and again, I picked numbers of magnitude here that would trigger a neighborhood meeting. But again, those were just my judgment calls. So I picked 10 feet in length, over 5 feet in height, or that would remove more than 10 mature trees. So again, I think that is probably a good topic for discussion, is that, and I welcome our planning director's input also, is that a substantial, and are those good examples or dimensions for something that would be substantial and trigger a neighborhood meeting? In section C of that section, that is the provision that says, sorry. That is the provision that says we're going to follow the subsection 4. I'm sorry. I apologize. I didn't mark up my copy, unfortunately, so I'm following along with all of you. In section C, subsection 4, the Public Works Director can take into account so forth, the long-term maintenance requirements and so forth. And I just added consistent with the other requirements of this ordinance, because it seemed that there are other requirements. Again, that's a pretty minor clarification, but I just thought that made sense here. In section 6, the applicant shall provide information on the noise abatement. I actually liked Councilmember Riddle's language. And so if I don't know how my colleagues feel, I'm just weighing in support of some version of Councilmember Riddle's language. Again, if there's some wordsmithing that needs to occur, I would fully support that, but I thought the more detail was helpful to me. I hear our city attorney's question, which is, does this reflect what's WashDOT has, or does it somehow mandate something more? So that was I think a good question for us to consider. Also in section C7, so the next 3 provisions, what I tried to do was make the language consistent among all 3 places where we have an independent review. So that was the first thing that I tried to do. And second, I tried to be clear that it's at the applicant's expense. And that, I think that is our understanding. But so again, I thought we had 3 places where we were kind of saying the same thing. And I took I'm not going to read it all over. I added and no affiliation with the applicant as part of the clarification of what we mean by independent. And also that we're the ones undertaking, clarifying that we're the ones, the city is the one undertaking the independent assessment. So again, that might go without saying, but I felt that it should be stated clearly. So those 3 are all pretty much the same for different subjects, structural, aesthetics, and landscaping.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Bodie. This is very comprehensive. Going through this, under purpose and intent, I completely agree. I think this is a much better language here. I also agree in section E, replacing evaluation with mitigation. As a matter of fact, I'll just say the one that I would say that we need a little bit of review, as you indicated from Director Bennett and Ms. Pratt. Under section B, proposed walls that are over 10 feet in length or over 5 feet. The question is a triggering there.
Yes.
What is the threshold? I believe the tree threshold seems commensurate with the broader ethic of our tree code. But the wall I have no experience with that. So
my own hesitation was on the 10 feet as well. Not necessarily the 5 feet in height. I thought that was tall. But I wasn't sure on the 10 feet.
And I appreciate all the other comments here that or the revisions you've made. I think the clarifications are appropriate, particularly the last two in terms of at applicant expense, third-party professional, no affiliation of the applicant. I think that's, we'd like to assume that, but we can't. So we need to be a little bit demonstrative in that regard.
Colleagues, other questions, comments, thoughts?
Councilmember Riddle, welcome.
Oh, hello, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. My apologies.
Do you have any questions or have you heard anything that you have interest in yet?
Not yet, but I will raise my hand if I do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, Councilmember Fairtime.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Bodie. These are very comprehensive, and want to echo Councilmember French's comments that these seem really in line. I had the same concern about Section B, making it more about the trees than about the length or the height. So I'm okay with this, especially the clarifications in Section C and D, where it's now very consistent. I was wondering how we were going to do that, and that's how we're going to do that. From a physics standpoint, one thing that concerns me is the use of the word deep for the frequencies. I think we should say low to high frequencies, since deep is up to interpretation. So that's my comment.
Good point.
We have 2 PhDs on the council.
Yeah, no kidding. Yes, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, and thanks for proposing these amendments. I think overall they're good. I just have a couple of little points. It's actually not the amendment, but there's a minor inconsistency in chapter 1626 about the neighborhood meetings. I like the idea. The inconsistency is that it says that everyone within 300 feet gets the application sent to them, and then everyone within 500 feet gets invited to the neighborhood meeting. And it seems like we should make those the same number just for consistency purposes. But otherwise, I mean, I like the idea of having a neighborhood meeting. I am a little hesitant about the language about noise. I'm okay with it in principle. I just want to make sure that we're not over specifying and that it is consistent with what WSDOT already is doing. But otherwise, I think the language is good. And I'm a chemist, not a physicist, so I will defer to Councilmember Faratani about low frequency. But overall, I like these clarifications.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Deputy Mayor for the opportunity.
Anything?
Yeah, sure.
Councilmember Cassidy.
Oh,
Yeah, no.
sorry.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Bodie.
Sorry,
and-
former Deputy Mayor.
That's all right. I really appreciate the work you did on this. And while it's wonderful to have a chemist and a physicist on the council, it's also terrific to have a legal mind on the council. So to help us think through the kind of detail that you have done here. And I really appreciate it. I too am comfortable with everything here, except in B. I don't think 10 feet is the right measurement. That's, you know, this dais is 20 feet for sure. So, you know, that's not a very big wall. So I think if we have a length at all, it should be more in the range of 20 to 25. But I am intrigued by the idea of actually making the number of trees removed the kind of trigger rather than the size of the wall. So
I would be supportive of changing it to 20 to 25, 20 or 25. I think that would be, you know, a kind of significant length, more than the frontage of a normal home, for example.
Oh, yes, yes. So, and I was just, I mean, I think even the retaining wall, as I understand some of the preliminary drawings we've seen and the proposed roundabout would be more than 10 feet. So,
Yes.
yeah. So thank you very much again.
Yes, Steve.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the nature of neighborhood meetings, the way they're, you know, where they came from. I'm not sure that you're all familiar with that, but it was created for situations where, you know, there was a proposed development like a short plat that was going to have like 3 lots or 4 lots. And the idea was to get the applicant to get people involved before they came to the city, because there was not going to be a public hearing. It's the state law doesn't allow us to have a public hearing on these smaller subdivisions. So, and you know, and so you're essentially telling the applicant to hold this meeting on their own. You got to follow these steps, and you got to provide us with minutes of, or notes on what happened and so forth. So, you know, imagine if you say that they have to conduct a meeting, and because you're notifying people along a 2 or 3 mile length of corridor at 300 feet on either side, it could involve, you know, hundreds, if not over 1,000 people. So where it's got to be held in the city of Lake Forest Park. So where do they hold that meeting? And you know, and you're leaving a lot of kind of things that could go wrong, because you have to, they have to do this notice and all of these steps. And so, you know, I would think that if you would really like to include this neighborhood meeting requirement, you would flip this around and do it for a smaller wall, where it's, you know, maybe a wall's up to 50 feet long or 100 feet long. It's a very, you know, limited in scope project. Then you might ask the applicant to do this. But doing it on the other end of these projects, and that's involving a long, you know, linear project, is really asking for a lot of procedural mishaps to happen, I think. And so the whole point of us making this a type 3 application is that, you know, this is a process by which we can document the comments, make sure the applicant gets those comments. And it's something we're used to doing. We're only really used to dealing with this neighborhood meeting on smaller developments where there is a neighborhood that's affected. This is several neighborhoods up and down the lakeside of our city, as we, you know, expect this first application to affect. So I would just encourage you to give strong consideration about whether this is really necessary.
Yes, Councilmember Bodie.
Yes, with respect, it was my intent to make this mandatory for a larger project. And of course, this is an exceptionally large project, and this ordinance applies to all retaining wall proposals. So with that in mind, I take your point that for the kind of retaining wall designs that we may be seeing an application for, that would involve a lot of people because it spans a long distance. But I also think that argues for this kind of engagement and conversation, and how good to have that information provided, synthesized and provided to the city. I do think that there are places where such a neighborhood meeting could be held, and that includes our schools, where we've had these kind of meetings in the past, or it could include the civic club, which would require, you know, rental of the space, but the schools would be free of charge. So I at least want to weigh in terms of keeping this for a substantial project, and recognizing that it's an important means of public engagement directly with the applicant. And that doesn't mean that every aspect of the design will change or anything like that. But it's important for the applicant on a major project to engage with our citizenry.
Yes, City Attorney.
So I would ask if you, just to be clear with us, if you want to keep the requirement that this is prior to the submission of the application. Sound Transit will argue that what we're doing, if we do that, is preventing them from vesting the application, because you cannot vest until you hold this meeting and have a pre-app. So I just want to make sure council is aware that I'm pretty confident that is what Sound Transit would say about this as it's currently written for these short plat applications.
So that is, I will say that is a good point, because I didn't especially focus on the timing of the neighborhood meeting.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if we would want to say something about the timing other than pre-application for these bigger projects. So I I appreciate the comment. I think that's a valid point.
Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just on point, and thank you, Ms. Pratt, for your clarification there. I agree with Councilmember Bodie that the magnitude of this project and other projects potentially too that could come down the line. I mean, we have no idea what's going to happen. I mean, not to throw a wrench in the works here, but they've been talking about widening 104 for 30 years. Who knows what could possibly happen? So part of my thinking as we go through this process is that one, Sound Transit's public process has been woefully inadequate, to be generous. And I've made no bones about I've held nothing back with that regard, and they know it, and they know that they have to step up. The public meetings that have been held, the recent public meeting that was held was lip service. It was not what the community expected, and certainly not what I believe this policy making bodies expected. So I think from that standpoint, we're a little bit late to the table when it comes to promoting a public meeting in advance of the application. So I don't know what the timing really looks like. I want to make sure that we do not go to the place. I'm willing to go right up to the edge where we went with relative to the Berkman Trail. I think this community has spoken very loudly and clearly about their expectations, and this is a generational, multi-generational project. Honestly, it's going to change the character of this community forever. The Berkman Trail was far less onerous in my opinion, and yet we ended up in a place where we had to ostensibly pay coming and going for the legal costs of that back in 2009 or 10 or whatever that was. So the lens I'm looking at this through is I think this community expects us to go right up to the place where our partners in WashDOT and Sound Transit says, hey, you know, you're getting really close to the line. And I know that they've said that in the past. At the same time, I think it's not disrespectful for this community to say, if we're in collaboration together in a partnership, as they've illustrated that they have said they want, for us to ask what we want, and then if they say, well, we have other thoughts about this, and we can go from there. I really appreciate the fact that Ms. Pratt, you and Director Bennett have said we have to be careful not to cross the line, and I do not want us to get into a place where this goes into radical litigation or anything else. At the same time, this community has had there have been a series of missteps by Sound Transit that we need to make sure that we catch up on, and we need to make sure we push back relative to what this community expects. And I'll leave it there.
So yes, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, thank you. And Ms. Pratt, your caution about the timing of a neighborhood meeting is well taken. In my mind, the spirit of the section is that the ordinance that we're considering is theoretical. We are putting in requirements about what we would like a retaining wall to have, but it's not about any specific project. And I feel that it's important for the community to be able to weigh in once an application is submitted, and then they can actually see, oh, this is what the wall is going to look like. So in that sense, I suppose it would make sense for the neighborhood meeting to be after the application is submitted. But I do think it's important, especially as others have said, Sound Transit's public outreach has been lacking. Important for there to be an opportunity for the public to weigh in on what they like and what they don't like about the project, so that amendments, clarifications, improvements can be made. So if there's a way to put that into the ordinance, I mean, I think that would be a valuable service for the community.
That would be an easy change to make.
Okay. Councilmember Fairtie.
I'm sorry, City Attorney Pratt, I didn't hear your comment there, I'm afraid.
She said it'd be a good change.
It would be, we could make a change that required the neighborhood meeting that Councilmember Bodie has suggested, but taking out the requirement that it be held prior to the application being submitted. And then we are not, we aren't causing any potential issues with this.
Councilmember Fairtie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm this is where my inexperience shows, because I wasn't paying attention to these kinds of processes when the town center redesign was being thought of. Am I making a false parallel when I see the same kind of thing happening, in the sense that the town center redesign came up? I don't know if it was even a type 3 type of permit, or whether it was post application that we were considering all this. And how did that end up the way that it did? Because we did hold a very large meeting, as you might recall, Lake Forest Park Elementary, and you know, a lot of people got a lot of say on that one, and I would appreciate that kind of meeting. I think that would actually clear the air quite a bit. So, am I making a false analogy?
Those meetings were actually to give council information about how to write that town center ordinance. So they were held even before the ordinance was adopted.
Thank you, City Attorney Pratt, having led that process. Yes, that's exactly what it was. That was input to the council. No application from the owners of the town center had been received, nor has one ever been received. So that's that. So if I might just comment on this topic as well. So I can't plead the sort of newbie status that my colleague has here, but if it was not a type 3 permit, what would it be if it required the sort of public hearing that we have in a lot of other situations? Is that a different kind of permit?
Yes, it would. Those are hearing. They're held before the hearing examiner, and he makes the decision.
Oh, no,
Right
I wasn't
now,
thinking of that. I was thinking of the kinds of public hearings that we have here in council before we adopt something.
Before you adopt an ordinance, yes. So you've held one. If this ordinance, the draft is changed enough so that you don't think the public has had an opportunity in a public hearing to comment on everything that you're potentially going to draft, then you would hold an additional public hearing for.
Okay, so that
Taking
could
this
be,
comment. Oh, yes.
that could be another option for the engagement of the public, is to hold a
Yes.
second public hearing. But I think that what I'm seeing from the facial expressions of my colleagues, that's not the kind of
Two different things.
Yes,
Yeah.
I understand it's two different
Yeah.
things. I'm just looking for public engagement in a way that keeps us on track and without putting us in any kind of jeopardy. Yes.
Very French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And colleagues, excellent comments. And Mr. Furtoni, there are no newbie questions. I mean, I mean that in a positive way. That they're all good questions. And actually, that's an excellent distinction, because as Ms. Pratt indicated, the meeting at Lake Forest Park Elementary relative to the town center program was basically an advisory meeting to get input from the community, rather than, there was no specific application, there was nothing you know, looming over us or anything else. And so that is quite different. At the same time, taking a step back, we're not going to be able to unwind the lack of public invitation of participation by Sound Transit up to this point. Our job right now, as I see it, is to try to figure out how we make sure that engagement happens at a level we believe is the community demands and we demand going forward, without getting ourselves in kind of a, as Vice Chair Casper said, legal, you know, in kind of jeopardy in terms of preempting vesting, for example, or any of the other kinds of situations. And so I guess to our friends at Sound Transit, if they're listening, what we're saying is the public engagement is a critical component of whatever happens going forward. And I'll defer to people smarter than I am about what is reasonable when it comes to this kind of public engagement. The question, Mr. Bennett, about the venue, that is something we've had come up in the past. We certainly could have a big tent party out here if we had to. I mean, I don't think this community would balk at you know, making it happen. I know it's a big lift, but we certainly could make it happen if that had to happen in terms of a size.
So I guess we need to have the attorneys, which we have two of them in here, kind of guide us on what would be the best decision for us to make as far as timing goes and all that.
I think you would be safest and avoiding litigation if you take out the requirement that the neighborhood meeting be held prior to the application being submitted.
Is post-application acceptable?
Is what?
Post-application?
I think there's no requirements in 1626-050 that would stop the project from moving forward while that neighborhood meeting is being noticed and held. So no, I don't see that as putting an ordinance in jeopardy.
Councilmember Bodie, you had
Yes,
something?
that sounds acceptable. I think, you know, as long as it doesn't end up, well, it's in the applicant's interest to make sure that occurs early in the application process. So I'm not worried about that, I guess. So I appreciate that proposal. That makes sense to me.
Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I'm in agreement. I think the neighborhood meeting after an application would be appropriate. As far as the noticing size and when we would need noticing, I apologize. I don't think I have Councilmember Bodie's content. If I can have that emailed to myself or to me, that'd be great. But from memory, it sounded like the intent was a right-of-way permit of a certain size for retaining walls. And I would entertain something along the lines of something that maybe affects multiple properties. And there's some properties that have quite a large frontage, and it would only affect directly affect one landowner. And I don't know if that is something that would require kind of more of a neighborhood noticing. But frontage is more than 25 feet for most property parcel sizes. So I think perhaps something that spans, you know, that impacts more than 3 parcels along the length would be maybe something that would trigger more of a neighborhood noticing. I don't know if my colleagues have any thought on that alternate method of determining when a neighborhood meeting is required.
Okay. Yes, Deputy Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Director Ben, I wanted to come back to a comment that you made earlier about, and I'm paraphrasing here, sort of that the procedurally there, it's sort of fraught, going to this level could be fraught with sort of hiccups. I'm just going to use the simplest term that I can. Is it because there are so many moving parts because of this kind of large scale notification? I think I'm stating the obvious, but are there other things that we're missing here? Because I don't want to have us, none of us want to have a situation where there is a mistake in the process that allows a challenge to something that is, you know, by the applicant or a legal action by the applicant because it's not, you know, the appearance, it's so onerous that they can't adhere to it. That's, I guess, what I'm saying.
Well, I think just changing it to after the application helps because what we would end up having with the ones we've had on short plats is that, you know, they kind of cut corners on whatever these, you know, the list of 6 requirements are, what the agenda should cover, and then with what they sent to us. So, you know, that, you know, not requiring that as part of a complete application helps a lot. It's something that we can continue to comment on, say, well, we still need this, and we can continue to review their application as well. So those are the kind of hiccups we've run into just because of the way it's currently couched. We're constantly saying, well, we didn't get this, so you don't have a complete application yet, which Ms. Pratt has you know, addressed, and glad to hear that council members are willing to follow her advice on that. The other things are just you know, a matter of, you know, that you're creating a lot of situations where the applicants you know, notice to the neighborhood is, you know, that can be questioned, like, well, I didn't get it until, so we deal with those kind of things all the time. It's like, well, we, you know, we're documenting, we send it to you, and we send it out to all these addresses. Here's our list of addresses. And so I don't know how, you know, how, you know, steep the applicants will be in these cases, but, you know, what it, you know, we've threatened to make people do the meeting over again when things weren't going well, and it ended up not having to do that yet, as I remember. But that's also a possibility. Like, well, you know, these people said they did not get the application, the agenda within a certain amount of time, and then everybody can argue about, well, you know, they actually left something off in the agenda, you know, that was required. So I guess that's what I'm referring to. This just creates a lot of things that maybe aren't really relevant to a good application and a good submission. We're getting our eyes off the main thing when we're arguing about, was this meeting held properly? So that would be my concern, just having seen how this goes with the short flats.
Just in response, thank you for that, Director Bennett. And just in response, the good news is our friends at WashDOT and Sound Transit, for example, have the resources to make sure that they dot their I's and cross their T's. We would hope, as opposed to some smaller, you know, builders. But your point is well taken, and we want to make sure that there aren't places where things get confused because of, you know, an oversight.
I'm pretty sure those entities would not have any oversights.
City Attorney Pratt.
So the neighborhood meeting requires notice to be given owners of real property within 500 feet of the project site. Staff easily knows what that means when we're talking about a short plat site. This is going to be a much larger site. Do you mean, I guess I need a discussion of what you mean. Do you mean just where the wall is more than 25 feet long, if there's breaks in it? Can you describe for me what you would prefer? 500
my thought had been that if the project is larger than that, whatever that is, whether we use the multiple properties or some length dimension, those are, I think, two different options that we could consider, that then you would give the notice for along the whole length of the project. Because you're not just talking, that's just a trigger for the neighborhood meeting. The neighborhood meetings on the larger project. That's the way I interpreted it.
So, and I'm sorry, I don't. So let's say you go with trees. 10 trees are taken out. So 10 trees are taken out at point A. But the project, you know, goes from A to Z. You would want 500 feet from A to Z, the entire project. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that kind of?
Because otherwise you're kind of balkanizing it a little bit, you know, so.
Councilor Cassover.
Thank you. And I just, not dealing with these numbers that much in my regular life. So 500 feet is, you know, how many sort of lots deep, as it were? I mean, if we did 500 feet from the wall, how many lots back do you imagine that would be?
I think the easiest way to you know, say what these are projects that are occurring within the right of way.
Yeah.
Right. That's the whole point of the whole scope of the ordinance. So just say within 500 feet of the edge of right of way.
Oh, no, that's fine. It's like, I don't know. I'm sorry. I just don't have a conception of whether, is that like 3 houses back from the right of way, 2 houses back from the one house back from the right. I just don't know.
Most, you know, in most situations, lots are 100 to 150 feet deep.
Yeah. So you're like,
all right. And so, and you've got 50, 60 feet of right of way between them, kind of going back into the neighborhood. So you're probably getting 2 to 3 houses back.
Okay, thank you very much.
And that seems reasonable to me.
Okay. All agreement? Okay. Summer, you have anything?
Not yet, just thank you to the city clerk for providing me Bodie's clarification amendments. Appreciate that.
So everybody's clear, I'm not picking on
Thank you.
Councilmember Lebo. It's just that he had reclused himself from all these discussions. So John, if there's anything else you'd like to talk about like last time, you're more than welcome. So from there, we will move on to, yes.
I have another question on the alternative that deals with noise policy and procedures through reflection and absorption techniques. Can I ask council what you would like to do with that? I didn't get, just from the discussion, a clear direction. My concern is how that lines up with the WSDOT regulations.
Could staff look into that and see if there is any kind of tension and pressure there? And Councilmember Riddle, who drafted that language, has her hand up too.
Okay.
But I would appreciate staff and council looking into that and just advising us if there's some language change they'd suggest.
Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was intending the language to be suggestatory rather than requiring. But I think it helps them understand, again, more of our purpose and intent is we recognize that the traffic will be there, the cars and the buses will be there, but it's about how they mitigate the impact to the households that are nearby. And so I feel like providing it as an option, as a sort of, not a directive, but this is what we're kind of looking for, these types of treatments. And then they could use the WSDOT code to show us that they're either addressing the same issue or doing, something similar to what we're suggesting, which is, a canted wall or something like that. So I don't know if, again, looking into the language from the WSDOT regulations would help us understand if this is in direct conflict, but if it's not in direct conflict, I appreciate it as an intent statement for our document.
So Councilmember Riddle, I think I was discussing before you were able to get onto the meeting that we did put your language into the intent section. Would you be satisfied with it being there rather than requiring the reflection and absorption technologies be used in 6?
Yeah.
Because I think the way it's written, we would be requiring absorption and reflection techniques.
Mm-hmm.
And then you give examples of, of those. So if it stays in the intent section, it is, preference.
I think I would defer wherever it's stronger, but not in conflict with WSDOT. Something, so wherever it'll be the strongest language in the code, without getting us into overreach. And I would recommend that for 6 we satisfy or exceed. But again, that I'm not 100% familiar of how the WSDOT code is written, if they refer to minimums or they refer to targets. So maximums versus minimums would impact whether we would want to say or exceeds.
Right, Deputy French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm hearing a couple of things here, Councilmember Riddle. My feeling is that we need to make a very strong statement here about noise attenuation and have the burden placed upon the applicant to ensure that they are adhering to the standards by WSDOT. I really think that is essential. And honestly, I don't think it's far enough, but I'm not sure where we can go beyond that from the standpoint. I mean, to be completely clear, I think WSDOT has chosen to do sound attenuation and mitigation in places where there are vast resources and influence, rather than people who politely say, please make sure that's not too noisy. So I think we need to be very strident and firm about this, about the noise question. And so whatever we've got to do to put it in here, it's definitely not a should, it's definitely a shall. I mean, I'm putting that in parentheses because, or quotes, because that's the spirit of which I think we're looking at this, and I think the community has asked us to look at it.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
And Councilmember Riddle, with your indulgence, and City Attorney Pratt, one thought I have is looking at the language suggested by Councilmember Riddle. We could say that the applicant shall provide documentation of how the retaining wall design satisfies at a minimum applicable WSDOT traffic noise and policies, such as, and then insert such as through reflection and absorption techniques, etc. So that way it's not mandating those specific things. It's saying that we don't mind, we kind of encourage going beyond WSDOT standards. The documentation, the shall is at a minimum, you have to do this. And then the examples are provided, which I think helps address Councilmember Riddle's concern. I think the more detail we have, the better off we are, but I appreciate the point our city attorney has raised.
Councilmember Goldman, then Councilmember Riddle.
Yes, thanks. And I think I want to be very goal oriented about this, and that I think it's very important that it be shall provide documentation about how they're meeting standards. But to be totally honest, I'm not really concerned about whether it's reflection or absorption or some other technology. I'm interested in the result. Have they mitigated noise? And so we should be very clear that they need to explain how they're mitigating noise, but I think we can be a bit more flexible about not over specifying which particular technique they have chosen for the wall design.
Right. Councilmember Riddle.
Yeah, so I have looked through all of their all the data points along 522 where they did their sound measurements earlier in the project, and they provided that report, and it's on the city's website, on our Sound Transit page on our website. And the one thing that I was disappointed about is they didn't take any current measurements at any location along 522 where there was a retaining wall. So it's hard for me to get a sense of if they understand the impact specifically between an area of 522 that has a retaining wall and one that doesn't, from the nature of reflection. Because what I'm seeing is that there's a lot of focus on how much sound is being originated. And so I think what I'm worried about is that those that are on the opposite side of the wall are not only getting the sound that is originated from the roadway, but they're getting the added reflection that is coming as well, which will increase the perceived and actual sound that they're experiencing. And I don't see anything that's really specifically addressing reflection, not in any of the tests that they ran, or in any of the language that I was really able to find while reading through that document. Of course, I'm not an acoustician, so it may be buried in there in the technical details, but I couldn't find it. And so I think this language to me was trying to address sort of a gap that I saw in their testing methods, and then what they've been describing, because they described that it's not going to add any more noise. But what we have right now is a retaining wall that is large rocks that are multifaceted, that have dirt and other vegetation above it. And we are benefiting acoustically from that environment. And when we get a very solid concrete wall, I cannot believe that there won't be an increase in experiential sound on one side of the road. And so that's why I kind of want them to prove their method. I want them to show their work. And I think by giving them the direction of the types of, address the sound by sending it up versus bouncing it straight back is one way that we can address that. I think perhaps we could be more specific in our intent, is to not, while even acknowledging, if we want to acknowledge that while the roadway noise may not be increased very much, the experience of the sound on the opposite side of the wall from the reflections is likely to be noticeably higher. And we want to prevent that experience from the folks who are living on that side of the wall, the opposite side of the street. So maybe we could just tweak our intent a bit to really kind of hone in on that's why we want to see this, because they're going to push back and say their numbers meet WSDOT because they're not originating more noise. But that's not my concern. It's not the origination of more noise, it's the reflection and doubling the noise on one side of the road.
Okay, yes, Deputy Mayor French.
But I think Ms. Pratt had a comment before.
I think so too.
So that, thank you, Councilmember Riddle, that clarifies for me what you were getting across with that language. So what I hear then is council's decision is, do you want to fill that gap for WSDOT? Do you think that is within your authority?
Councilmember Casso, yeah, actually, Deputy Mayor French was first, then Councilmember Cassover.
Now my head is turning from Ms. Pratt's comment. That's another can of worms to open up, apparently. First of all, I just want to say, Councilmember Riddle, thank you very much for your work on this. I think it's very good. I think that Councilmember Bodie's comment about at a minimum makes a lot of sense to me as well. I'm not sure now with the introduction of what Ms. Pratt said about, do we want to go into a place where do we have that authority to go there? You know, there's a certain part of me says, hey, you know, let's test the waters a little bit here and see what we can do, and maybe we'll be a leader and with regards to the code.
Oh, thank you. So I just pulled up on my phone because I forgot the wrong computer with me. The WSDOT guidelines, shoulder use and noise studies. And I'd read this before and I just want to remind myself, you know, the WSDOT guidelines are actually based on the federal guidelines. And these guidelines are all about what you have to do to meet federal requirements if you get a federal grant, which of course most highways, you know, do use federal money. So, and a noise study is required, but I think they've done what they think they have had to do. So, you know, I think that's where we are kind of. I don't think that they have to do any more than they have done to meet their own or federal requirements. So I'm not sure what our ability is to ask for more. I just don't know. And I think that this may be something that we have to ask about before we try to codify it. So that's my thought on this. So I guess what I want to say about all of this is, look, we are in a negotiating position right now with Sound Transit, who on our behalf is negotiating with the Washington State Department of Transportation. If we take action that puts Sound Transit in a defensive posture and puts the Washington State Department of Transportation in a defensive posture, we may get nothing that we ask for. And that is an outcome that I want us to avoid. So I just want us to tread very carefully here. I think WSDOT's done what they've had to do. I think that if we ask them to do more, that should be a process of negotiation rather than an ordinance that we write. So that's my perspective on it. Have at me.
Councilmember Bodie.
I think we don't have to be afraid and that we can reflect our community values, and I think we can advocate for them and push up until that point. I mean, I think it's important to advocate for our community because, as Deputy Mayor French says, this is a project of generational impact. And I am very concerned about the noise. I did look, it's been a while now, but I did look at the noise report that Sound Transit did. And frankly, it didn't seem to pass the red face test. I mean, I think you could argue that it didn't in good faith meet the federal standards. I think they were looking, you know how they say there are models where you kind of look for the result and then you develop the model that goes for it. I think that they wanted the result that there was negligible noise impact, and they didn't really look at even the fact that the traffic on the non-retaining wall side is coming so much closer to people's front doors. And also their assessment of what the current noise levels are was also, it seemed very low compared to readings that our community members have taken. So I think they were very selective in where they sampled and when they sampled and so forth. So I'm not at all sure that it isn't a good thing to ask them to do an update and to take into account the reflective noise issue. We can always change our mind later on if there's an issue. I mean, if there was, I can't imagine that there would be a court challenge over the issue of, well, you're going too far in mitigating noise in your community. To me, that's like, from a public relations point of view, a terrible position for Sound Transit to be in. They should, these are residences. Most of their construction is like along freeways and on, commercial areas. And this is an exceptional case that needs exceptional treatment. So I appreciate the sentiment. I come at it from the point of view of they didn't do a good job, and let's advocate for what we need.
I guess my question then is writing it into an ordinance as a shall is that advocating or is that demanding?
I think we've been, by saying at a minimum, I think we've given them the flexibility, and then we're advocating for the more. In other words, at a minimum, they have to meet the WSDOT. That's the way it says. Yeah. And then that's why I changed it to such as. So we communicate that intent that is so important that Councilmember Riddle brought up, which is we do want these kind of features. And it gives us a basis for saying, well, there's also this reflective noise going to homeowners, which you don't usually have. That's my view.
Yes, Councilmember Goldman.
Yeah, so bit of context. This was before I joined the council, but I remember when we were doing the parking garage ordinance and there was litigation as a result. And I think one of the things that was challenged was the requirement that there be solar panels on the roof. So it seems to me that I would not feel safe saying, who could possibly object to X, Y, and Z, because we have historical evidence that there were objections to X, Y, and Z. So I do think we should tread carefully. And so I would be kind of interested to see, like, where do we think we can be on that line where we're saying we really, really want this? It's important that there be noise mitigation, but it's not a demand that could be balked at.
Just on point, if I may, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Goldman. I would just say that I have a little bit different viewpoint of this. The solar panels are nice to have. This is an environmental issue, and the EPA actually regulates noise. So they have standards for trucks, for various things. And Councilmember or Vice Chair Cassover and I went through some of that code, the federal code relative to when we updated our noise ordinance. And so, when it comes to environmental things, those are not, I never want to think that they're nice to haves. And that the solar is, while it's an environmental amenity, it's a capital kind of component. This is an environmental way of life, health issue. And so I just want to make that distinction, because I think during the parking garage discussions, there were other issues that they had, and solar panels just happened to be one that they were like, and to be perfectly clear, Sound Transit has put solar panels in other locations.
Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. In doing a quick perusal of the WSDOT noise policy, it seems that they're focusing on, is the originating noise getting bigger and louder? And when they refer to things like noise walls, sound walls, what they seem to be talking about is barriers to prevent folks on the opposite side of the wall from hearing the noise. So I will say that as I've looked through this, I personally haven't seen anything about that impact of reflected noise. And so I feel like if it isn't in their guidelines, that we should try to protect our community by putting something in ours. And if they can come back and say, oh yeah, it's addressed here, I mean, then we can have a conversation as policymakers if you want to back off and let their content go forward. But I can't find any content about reflected noise so far in my perusal. So I feel confident that we should be able to move forward. And I would look to our city attorney to be able to confirm that with a little more thorough review.
I'll just say have no expertise in noise evaluation and regulations, so it won't be me confirming that. But I will say I'm hearing two different things. Councilmember Bodie using the language such as through, which wouldn't be a requirement for the reflection and absorption. But I hear Councilmember Riddle wanting that to be a requirement. So I am still not sure how you would like this written.
And if
Is your hand back up?
Me?
Yeah.
I think the city attorney mentioned, I think we should be stronger, and we shall require at the very least proof that reflection doesn't increase the effective acoustical experience of the neighbors on the east side of the road. I feel strongly about that.
That's going to cast over.
Thank you. And I just want to make it clear that I agree that these are important issues and we should address them. I think what I'm talking about is the strategy that we use to achieve success. And I'm just not entirely certain that we've got it yet. And I don't know whether the person who has been in negotiations with Sound Transit, who happens to be our public works director, who's right here, might have some words of wisdom to share with us at this point. Or putting you on the spot, I hate to do that, sorry about that. But I just think as a council, we are not really sitting here with a full understanding of what it's going to take to get us where we want to, where we all know we want to be. That's the most important thing to me, we want this project to be, as we've said many times on this day, as the very best it can be for the city of Lake Forest Park. Now, how we get there is not an easy set of decisions to make. And we frankly can use all the help we can get. So if either our city administrator or our public works director who have been involved in those negotiations, have you also, Director Bennett, been involved in the negotiations with the Sound Transit and WashDOT?
Yes, but not particularly on this issue of noise mitigation.
Or the wall design, a little bit. Well, anyway,
not the structural wall design, but we've been talking, more about the permitting.
The permitting, okay. So, putting you guys on the spot, anything to share?
I can say we do have experts that we can reach out to do this research for us quickly and see kind of what the noise mitigation standards are for WashDOT now and what council's trying to accomplish. Our attempt at this has been provide the aesthetics that council's looking for, the addition of whatever landscaping we can get in there. We understand, I think everybody understands who deals with these walls, there is that reflective nature. And so as much as we can soften it as possible, I think we had early discussions in several council meetings about laying the walls back and what that effort would take. And so that's a long way of saying, I don't have the answer for you tonight, but we will reach out to our engineering firm and see what we can get from them. I'm not opposed to pushing until I get pushed back and say, no, go home. It's always worth asking, and it's always worth trying to push that envelope and see how far you can get within the confines of what your city attorney tells you are safe confines.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Councilmember Furtani.
Yes, Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Vice Chair Castlever, for your comment about strategy. I completely agree with you. I think in some ways, if we pitch this as a public health issue, in the sense that reflective noise has been shown could cause deleterious health effects on people, this might be a much better way to frame the issue. It's not a nice to have, as Deputy Mayor French said, it's a necessary thing. So Administrator Hill, if you could ask your consultant in that regard, is there a way in which we could bring the public health angle into it? That would be great.
Okay, Councilmember Riddle.
Another place where their documentation is making an assumption that a primarily residential environment is not as impacted during the day, with the assumption that most of the residents would be out at work, away from their home. And we all know that is not the current condition that we're seeing across the board. And so I think there's also some concern that I have that simply their assumptions that have worked well in the past may not be applicable anymore. So I think the idea of focusing on nighttime level traffic noises as being the more disturbing disturbance noises rather than the daytime ones, I think goes to partner with what Councilmember Furtani was mentioning about this being a health issue. It's because we do have more people home during the day when the traffic is heavy during the day.
Do you have any other questions? Okay, seeing none, is that it for tonight? Anybody else?
Oh, we had 20 more agenda items.
Oh, yeah. You know I am me, but you all raise kids and I don't think it ever hurts to ask, because my kids never stop asking and eventually they seem to get what they want. So just keep asking and keep trying, because we got to do that. And Bill will look into that and see where we can go. We're trying from all angles. So council, very good. Any other questions from you, Samra?
Not specifically. I think we just need to learn a lot more about the specific WSDOT codes to be able what we can ask. Because I feel like there's a place here for us to be able to ask appropriately where there's gaps in their current policies.
Okay, Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question. Timing. Where are we on this? There is a we can continue. I want to make sure that we don't let the perfect be the enemy of the very good here. And parenthetically, I sense some urgency. So what is Director Bennett, what is your thought in terms of next steps?
Well, the council needs to decide whether it wants to have another public hearing on this. We don't have any other regulatory timeframes that we have to. I think all those clocks have reached their endpoint. We've received comments. No, we didn't receive any comments through SEPA or through the Commerce notice. So it really is. It's up to the council at this point. We know that we have an applicant that wants to make application. So sooner the better.
Yes. I'm sorry, Ms. Brown.
Well, if you're going to hold another hearing, we need to provide a draft or be asking specific questions so that the public, and that includes Sound Transit and WSDOT,
Sure,
can comment on what council is considering drafting. So that puts us in a bit of a pickle with the noise, because it sounds like you're asking us to do some more investigating. I'm not sure how we would draft that for another public hearing in order for WSDOT and Sound Transit to comment. I'm sure the public has enough information to comment from what you've said tonight.
I think you just illustrated my point about the perfect being the enemy of the very good. With the timeline that I think we're looking at here, colleagues, my concern is I think we need to get this before the public as soon as possible for a way in. But at the same time, I fully recognize that the noise is a very, very large problem. So I don't know where the sweet spot is in terms of the balance on that regard. If I may follow up, Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wonder, Attorney Pratt, whether it would be possible to draft so that there are actually two options on the noise that council can consider. One which is more suggestive and one which is more directive. And so that they're both ready for us, and that then when we hear back from our consultants, we are in a position to make a more informed choice between those two options. Would that be possible?
I could certainly do that. I'm not sure that one or the other is what you're going to get back from that consultant, but that is what I could draft for public hearing.
Deputy
Are
Mayor
we-
French, did you have something? Councilmember
Please go
Riddle?
ahead. I'm looking.
Are
Thank you,
we-
Councilmember Riddle.
Are we saying we need another public hearing? I'm raising that question. I honestly am of mixed views, because in the ideal world, I would like to do that. On the other hand, I think what we've done is respond to the public comments here. So I don't think there are any surprises or unaddressed issues at this stage. So as I said, I'm of mixed minds. Normally, without the time pressure that I feel here, I would say, let's have another public hearing. But I actually think we should move to adoption. And I do like Councilmember Cassover's idea that let's have staff draft two options on the reflective noise element. And one could be kind of the, some variation on what I suggested, and another could be more prescriptive.
City Attorney Pratt, then Councilmember Riddle.
I'll just give you what I think you'd hear from Sound Transit and WashDOT on another hearing. The test is not did you respond to all the comments, but did the public, including Sound Transit and WashDOT, know that now it's going to have a type 3 permit process, or know that it's going to possibly have a neighborhood meeting, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that's what the question is for when it comes up before the growth board.
So could we have a public hearing next week?
Let's talk about calendar in a second.
Okay, Councilmember Riddle.
Thank you. I agree with Councilmember Cassover. I would like to see, I don't know, the safe language that we know will be suggestive of our intent, and then something that's a lot more stronger around, specifically around reflected noise, as I do believe that that's a place that they don't specifically address, so we have an opportunity there. So I would like to see both those while the consultant is doing their review. So concur with my colleague.
Mayor French.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, colleagues. And I'm looking at the calendar. The way I see this is, if I unfocus my eyes, I believe that this needs to come before this body no later than the 22nd of this month, which means we have to have a hearing in advance of that. Or at this, I'm a little.
You could have it that night.
Could we have it the same night?
Yep.
I'm a little hesitant because. Yeah, but if we could have it that night, the 22nd, and consider it for action at that time. I also think it is probably important for us to have in the interim, have an opportunity, if it means a special meeting, or we bifurcate the budget and finance meeting next week. Budget and finance and a special meeting for consideration of whatever specific options that our legal and planning team have come up for us, so that we have our I's dotted and our T's crossed going into a public hearing. Is that give enough time, Ms. Pratt? If we did a special meeting next week at some point in the mix, how far in advance do we have? Can the council consider the options that would be? I'm assuming it would be up to Thursday of next week.
The 15th. So
15th.
June 15th.
Or including Thursday of next week.
I could certainly, rewrite that section and have it to you by the 15th, if that's what you're saying, or.
I'm also just thinking about legal requirements and also decorum when it comes to publishing the code in advance of a hearing.
Oh, we usually do 7 days.
So Thursday would be.
Well, we usually send out the notice of the public hearing at least 7 to 10 days.
Okay.
The city clerk does that. But the actual ordinance is usually not in the packet until the Monday before your meeting.
Okay. So
the meeting on the 22nd, that ordinance would not usually go out to the public until the 19th. That's how we've done it in the past.
Thank you. If I may.
Yes.
My suggestion is then if staff is amenable for us to have a special meeting on Thursday, the 15th. And Director Vaughn is not here, so I don't have the chance to weigh in with her. I think there are only 2 items on that budget and finance meeting.
Yeah, so it's the dashboard and then the memo that Director Perigo sent to you about the pavement program. And that can push, I mean, you've got the memo. One concern I have is you have Juneteenth, City Hall is closed. So really you should get the packet out to the public, including Sound Transit and WashDOT, probably on Friday. Because I think Tuesday is not appropriate for a public hearing and action 2 days later.
Agreed. So would Mr. Hill, would that work for us to have a special meeting on the 15th then?
Yeah, I mean, we can get it noticed, definitely. Hold your budget and finance like you did last time for 30
Just
minutes.
Split half.
And then and follow up with a special meeting.
Is that acceptable for everyone? Okay.
And for clarification, I for that evening, I think I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we heard concurrence on pretty much everything. What we're talking about is this
Narrow
noise
focus.
section, very
Correct.
narrow.
Yes.
Focus. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hill. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Council.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Samra. Have a good evening. Guess we're done. How about? Thank you.
Right.
Phil won't be here.
It's okay. Yeah.